All right, what is going on, guys? Blacklisted Voice. I think this is episode 24. Going off a little bit off the rails again here. We're on a podcast with my clients, Hannah here. She's a nutrition coach, so we're just going to kind of dive in and chat about some nutrition here. So, Hannah, you want to introduce yourself, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What's up, everybody? I'm Hannah. I wish I had a super cool introduction to give you, but I don't. I just like to do some nutrition coaching, and I work with Kyle a lot, so I thought we'd have a podcast about it.
Yeah. How long have you been in like the fitness space for?
The fitness space. Um, well, if you kind of count my sports career in high school, I struggled to say career, but participation.
Yeah.
I probably started doing competitive sports around the age of 14,
Okay.
and then kind of got out of that when I went to college, but I was involved with the women's basketball team at Florida. So still kind of around that competitive culture. Um, but I didn't really get into the CrossFit space until I was about 21, 22.
Yeah.
So that puts it, let's see, I just turned 26 last week. So what, 4 years?
Happy birthday.
4 or 5 years? Thank you.
Still recovering.
Yeah.
So 4 or 5 years. And did you start doing kind of macro nutrition coaching right off the bat, or was it like did you get in through personal training or?
Yeah, so I had started CrossFit just as kind of something to do and stay in shape. And I had probably done it for about a year, and I wasn't really making as much progress as kind of I thought I would. And so I kind of took a step back and was kind of like, okay, what are the pieces of the puzzle that maybe I'm not paying attention to or connecting?
Mhm.
And I continued to kind of put that off for probably another 6 or 8 months because I was a little bit in denial. I was like, no, like I'm in college, I can kind of like eat and drink and just show up and it'll be totally fine. I'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, and then I actually, like, my last year of college, I went through like a really horrible breakup and decided I didn't want to go to grad school.
Okay.
And I had spent most of my time at Florida pretty much just preparing myself to go to grad school. And so
Oh
when
wow.
I made, yeah, it was a big kind of change that I
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
really expecting.
Yeah.
But it actually was a good thing because for my 23rd birthday, I actually bought myself a WAG membership to start doing like being coached
Yeah.
by someone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what got me started into nutrition in general.
Mhm.
And then kind of through my own experience, I just had such an interesting, mostly positive, but also very interesting experience with it. So kind of led me to using my experience to help other people.
Yeah, for sure. And was that experience like you figuring things out through WAG, or was like that you kind of on your own or?
It was a nice combination, I think. I had about 6 months until I was going to graduate college, and I didn't really know what I was going to do next.
Mhm.
So my degree was in psychology, and I was originally going to go and study more psychology, but I just didn't, like I said. So I was like really into CrossFit, and I was like, okay, there's a lot of psychology that goes into coaching,
Yeah.
relating to people and understanding people. And so I figured I would just wing it for a little bit until I figured out what I wanted to do. And that landed me in Atlanta. So I moved
Okay.
up here with a friend and started coaching at a gym in town. I'd never coached before ever, like zero coaching. So
Sweet.
I started from the bottom.
Yeah.
Started from
So
the
like you
bottom
got,
out
did you
here.
get your L1 and then you started, or?
Yeah, I had visited up here to find an apartment, and I dropped in at a gym, and they're like, hey, we need a coach coming up. One of our coaches is moving. And I was like, I would love to do that for you. If you're interested,
Yeah.
I'll get my level 1 in next month and do it. So
Sweet.
I got my level 1 in May, and then I moved up here and started coaching the end of June, I think.
Legit.
So
That's a fast turnaround.
yeah, I was fast turnaround. I had been getting nutrition coaching though, for myself that whole entire time. So I was about
Gotcha.
6 months into
Yeah.
it at that point.
Okay. And so when you hired a nutrition coach, were you looking to get like better performance? Like, were you trying to like get better aesthetics? Like, what was your goal when you hired the coach?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of background on kind of that would be helpful for some
Yeah.
people. Um, I had lost about 20 pounds in about maybe 4 months. So really, really fast.
Yeah.
And also not intentionally. So I was really sad. And so I didn't eat. And I was like, okay, like I am done being sad. I need to figure out what to do to prioritize my health and make sure that I'm just healthy in general. So
Yeah.
the accountability was really what I was looking for when I signed up with WAG. In addition to gaining the knowledge of what to eat and how much to eat. I had done gym challenges before, like 90-day challenges,
Mhm.
whatever. So I had a background of what macros were, but I had absolutely no idea kind of the depth of what I do now as
Yeah.
far as amounts and quantity, stuff like that.
So like explain that a little bit more. Like what was kind of like the tipping point where you started to see like, oh wow, there's a lot more than just like a carb's a carb and a fat's a fat and a protein's a protein.
Totally. So when I had done like the gym challenges and stuff like that, it was always about losing weight.
Yeah.
So they had us on pretty extreme deficits, in my opinion. I think my starting one was like 1650 or something. So
So that was your
1650 calories
and
was like my goal.
what are you eating now?
Oh, I probably eat 2400 and then at least 2800 2 times a week.
So
So
significantly more than what
yeah,
they
and those are my maintenance calories, and I'm 5'3" and 138 pounds, so I'm not like a big person,
yeah.
pretty small person.
Yeah.
And at the time when I was on that 1650 60-day challenge or whatever, I was probably 143, so I was even heavier and on
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure like I might have lost like 3 pounds, but then in maybe the next month I had gained all of that back because obviously that's way too extreme of a deficit for somebody. And then to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
right back to eating normal, it's not going to be a long-term solution.
Yeah. So like what do you mean by it was too extreme of a deficit? And then like do you think there's like a bridge that needs to happen when you're coming out of that deficit? Like or does that kind of make sense or
Yeah, so when you put someone in a deficit, general rule is you don't want them to be in a larger deficit than about 25% of their maintenance calories. So if they are, the body kind of freaks out and goes into more of like a survival mode than a
Mhm.
like leaning out mode.
Okay.
So it does come down to calories in, calories out. So that's the basis of losing, gaining weight. However, there are a lot of things in the middle of that that allow someone to either gain or lose weight.
Yeah.
So to lean out, the body needs to feel safe. And to stay lean, it needs to continue feeling safe. If someone is in a deficit larger than 25%, their body is no longer feeling safe and it's
Mhm.
not going to act like it normally would.
Okay. So explain that. Like, are you just holding on to food more? Are your hormones like different? Does that like what is that
Yeah,
safe
I mean
feeling?
it's so close to the amount of food that you need just to survive that anything else that you're asking of it, it's just like, no, like I'm trying to survive. Like this
Yeah.
is not nearly sustainable enough for you to be asking me to do exercise, let alone household chores.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, so kind of like what we wanted to talk about was how often we're kind of seeing this underfeeding of in particular athletes.
Right. Right.
I see it a lot in general population as well,
Mhm.
but us, we're kind of specifically looking at someone who's looking at performance or, going to qualifiers, that kind of thing in the sport of CrossFit.
Right.
So
Sorry.
yeah, I mean, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so you say, like, you see it in Gen Pop, you see it in athletes. And I think a lot of athletes kind of get their start in like a class type setting, at least for
Totally.
right now. Do you think like those, I guess back when I started, it was like Paleo Challenge, and I think like it's Whole 30
Yeah.
or whatever, 90-day challenge. Do you think that is like a catalyst for these kind of like under eating habits, or do you think it like stems from something else? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think people are so focused on the number on the scale
Hmm.
that they kind of lose sight of like the big picture, if that kind of makes sense. So, when someone starts CrossFit and they're overweight, obviously the goal of the gym is to help them become healthier, and usually that involves losing some weight.
Hmm.
However, diet culture just has it drilled into our brains that you have to be a certain number. And until you're that number, nothing's going to go right for you.
Yeah.
But that's just so far from the truth. You can be the same number on the scale and look completely different.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that go on that are more important to focus on than just losing weight on the scale.
For sure. What are, so like, can you give us some examples of like things you should be focusing on?
Yeah, so kind of, well, I guess we can start from someone who's brand new and then kind of move up.
Yeah.
So first thing is having a consistent intake of food. So a lot of times when someone starts with me, they don't really consistently even eat the same amount of calories, let alone the same times of day. Sometimes people don't eat until 2 p.m. because they say they're not hungry, and then they eat a lot until 9 p.m.
It's like go,
So,
and like stuff
yeah,
your face and then try and fall asleep. And then you're like,
exactly.
you have
Like,
so much energy
obviously,
now.
you're going to be hungry if you haven't eaten until 2. Like,
Yeah.
just that's how it works. Yeah, so first, getting a nice routine of intake, regardless of what it is to start, just a nice routine of spreading out food throughout the day. Then I look at sleep a lot. So, 7 to 9 hours is pretty ideal. And also consistency in that. So going to bed around the same time, waking up around the same time. And that's something that can take a little bit of time to really adjust someone to.
Sometimes I feel like that's almost harder than like getting something consistently.
Totally.
I don't know why, because you feel so fucking amazing when you actually start sleeping.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So when I first moved to Atlanta, I used to work at Starbucks, and my shift was at 5, so I have to get up at 4:15, and I would work from 5 to 10:30. Then I'd go take a nap. Then I'd go train around 1 to like 3. Then I would coach CrossFit from 5:30 to 7:30, and then come home and then try and eat and then go sleep. But I was getting maybe 6-7 hours.
Yeah.
And I was like, why am I like not leaning out? Why am I gaining weight? It's like I haven't changed anything. I'm exercising more, actually.
Right.
Moving more. Yeah, I was like, obviously because your cortisol is so high because you don't sleep. So you should probably get your lifestyle together a little bit. So sleep and routine of eating. Then I look at stress level. So that one can be pretty hard to adjust someone, because we have stressors in our day that, we can't just be like, oh, I'm not going to work today. Screw it. I have to control my stress. I can't go to work today.
Do you find too, like you get people who like, you like sit down with them to talk about it, and it's like, this person is stressed out of their fucking mind, and they're like, so like
Oh
on
yeah.
an average day, like what would you say your stress levels are? And they're like, yeah, I don't know, probably like a 2, maybe a 3 some days. And you're like,
Yeah.
I don't think that's accurate.
Yeah. And to be honest, since most people are working from home,
Yeah.
they're working more because
Yeah.
they're at home. And so
Okay.
it's kind of like their employees are like, there's not an off time because you're just always at home. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I have a client who starts like working at 8 right after he works out, and then doesn't stop working until 9, and then just does that on a clock all the time.
All the time.
So it's
Yeah.
like
So does he?
to ask someone to add tracking to a specific macro profile on top of that stress
Right.
is just a recipe for disaster because they
Yeah.
can't sustain that.
Yeah. So do
Yeah.
you so like does that guy or that individual, do they
Mhm.
recognize that like they're in a pretty stressed out state with work, or like have you ever come across
Yeah, I
people
mean,
that just
luckily
don't
he's been with me. Yeah, yeah. So luckily he's been with me for a while, so I've kind of gotten to know him and how to pick up on some of his cues when I know that he's stressed or not stressed.
Okay, yeah.
And there was a period of time where he wasn't working with
Mhm.
COVID, and so he was definitely not stressed. Like he's someone who doesn't kind of freak out about the future. He's just like, I know I'm going to get a job. I just don't know exactly when that's going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
But during that time, he was just totally different
Okay,
in his
yeah,
mood and his energy. Like what he was willing to put into his fitness
for sure.
was a lot more effort because he had the energy.
Yeah, yeah. So so once you get a baseline of their stress, like what are you doing with that kind of that knowledge then?
So mostly I'm making them aware of it.
Okay.
A lot of poor eating behaviors are connected to lack of sleep and higher stress.
Yeah, yeah.
So people will kind of turn to food or maybe less than ideal food quality
Hmm.
to kind of cope with it or make them feel a little bit better. Or
Yeah,
sometimes it's not even to cope with it, but it's just like ease. So it's just easier for them to order takeout than it is to spend the time on the weekend to cook their food in advance or something like that.
for sure, for sure.
Yep. So I just make them aware of it and try to connect kind of those behaviors. And then I have them track that for a
Yeah.
week. And then they're like, oh my God, you're so right. I ordered takeout 8 times this week. And you're like, yeah, like I don't know how much is in that, but it's probably a lot more than you would think and that you would
Yeah.
make on your own.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, it's just like in the restaurant industry too, like I think we were chatting about this earlier, but like
Yeah.
fat is delicious and they're going to
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
to load fat into this, and it's going to be like, they're probably not counting the calories. Even if they have like that calorie counter on like a menu or whatever, they're probably not counting the calories of the oils that they cook it in. And,
Totally.
like, you're
Totally.
going to get
And
way
I mean, I hate to like zone in just on calories because it's really calories is a great metric for like amount, but it's like the quality in that.
yeah,
Like think about oils that are used at fast food restaurants. It's not the same quality of fat that you would be getting if you're using olive oil at home
right,
or having nuts and seeds, that kind of stuff.
right, right.
So not only is it super dense, but it's just of the wrong kind of things. And I don't
Yeah,
even want to say wrong. It's not wrong. You can have it occasionally. It's just you don't want that to be the majority of your intake.
right, right. Like
Yeah.
why is that?
Just makes you feel like shit. And so when
Yeah.
you feel like shit, you just keep making shit choices. It's
So
like
it's like
a
a almost
rolling
like
snowball.
that commercial that's out lately where the lady just like rolls herself out of bed and then like collects all those things.
Totally.
Basically,
Yeah,
like
you're just like rolling into the next
that
thing and
with
you're
food.
not even thinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
mean that's so a lot of times like General Pop, they're just doing this like yo-yo dieting where it's you eat almost nothing some days and then it catches up with you and then you eat a shit ton the next day and then kind of goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So there's no level.
yeah,
Like there's
yeah,
no consistent intake
yeah.
um
And
throughout
so
the time, throughout the week.
is that
So
also
they
like putting your body into like a super stress state, and then it's like then you're coming back out of that into like an overly relaxed state, and then like coming like you're on this constant roller coaster of like like stress hormones and like emotions and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, like I think it would be hard to know exactly without hooking someone up to a machine.
yeah, for sure.
But what it does do is it convinces people that they're not eating a lot, but over the week with that up and down,
Yeah.
towards the end of the week, they net more than their maintenance calories.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So they'll be like, no, I only had 1,200 calories. Like, there's no way I'm overeating. But then it's like, okay, but you had 3 weekend days where you had 5,000, 6,000. So
Yeah.
if we kind of net those averages over the week, you end up being a surplus. And that's how people gain weight over time with like, it's just a lack of awareness, really.
Yeah. For sure. That makes sense. So that's kind of like your intake process with everybody then?
I pretty much have people track their food and I just kind of see where they're at. Some
Yeah.
people, a lot of my athletes eat pretty consistently. They're just under eating. So, I'm a big advocate for starting someone at maintenance.
Okay.
I think a lot of times nutrition coaching or nutrition programs, like I said, are so focused on like getting the results and like taking a before and after picture of their clients, like trying to drive up business and all that kind of jazz, which is great for the client that wants to lose weight. However, after that 3 months, it's no one has taught them anything. So they don't have any skills to maintain that. Sometimes they're in too big of a deficit. So then they just gain it all back and more.
Yeah.
Some of that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So they're almost going back on like a yo-yo diet with like that.
Yeah. It just becomes like a little bit longer. So you did like, okay, instead of like 2 days, oh, you did 90 days. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right on.
Yeah.
And so is that kind of like the trend that you're seeing right now in like sports and like nutrition culture, diet culture, is kind of like that underfeeding and then just like
I think people are like really obsessed with like what they look like. And when someone comes for nutrition coaching, almost their number one reason is because they want to look better.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about performance athletes who want to go to qualifiers and push their bodies to the extremes that they do on a weekly basis, what are they really wanting? Like, are you wanting to perform, or are you wanting to, look good and have great aesthetics?
Yeah.
It's not to say you can't have both, because, you can.
Right.
But it's not, for them, it's not about giving them less food.
Right. So is it like
Which is kind of like the tricky spot, because for someone who's general pop, it might be that they need less food, but generally speaking, they need consistently one intake versus the up down big extremes like we talked about. But for the athlete, they already have a fairly, generally, not everybody, but generally they already have a fairly consistent intake, and you can see that. You can see that they're having trouble losing weight. Maybe they're having trouble improving their strength, recovering, something like that. And for that individual, they're not eating enough.
Yeah. So like, what are some of the biomarkers or like tendencies that you'll see that you kind of like, let's say you're not like nutrition certified, but like one of your athlete, you're like working with an athlete. What are some biomarkers that you kind of look for or try and patterns that you try and see if you're not, to see if your athlete might be under eating? Does that make sense?
Yep. So a couple of the big ones. The easiest one for a coach to be able to see would be their strength numbers. So if their strength numbers have not improved and you're following a quality program, that knows how to progress it and things like that, and they haven't improved their lifts, even if an advanced athlete, that's a pretty big sign. that they're not eating enough food. There's sometimes this like stigma of that you've reached your end, like weightlifting total.
Yeah.
I just kind of think that's kind of funny to think of.
What do
Like,
you,
I
so
think
what do you
that's
mean
more
by
of like
that?
a mental, I don't know. I just like remember hearing from like more advanced athletes, I would say, or in the sport longer, and like, man, I have not improved my front squat in 2 years. And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, but like Olympians train for very extended periods of time and continuously improve their strength. So I don't think it's you. I think it's something that's going on with your food or your programming,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if that kind of makes sense. So
Yeah. I see
the
what you're
strength
saying.
number is a
So
big one.
yeah, so like the athlete basically thinks like they've hit their
Potential.
absolute strength. Yeah,
But they're still in
potential in
their
the
20s and you're like, no,
you're like
no,
you're
you have not.
25.
Yeah. No.
No.
Um,
So that makes
obviously there's like some like, okay, like do you move well, all that kind of stuff. But yeah,
yeah.
generally speaking, like a performance athlete, if they haven't improved their strength, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Second thing is their mood. So are they irritated a lot? Are they sad? Are
Mhm.
they down? Those are big kind of indicators that not eating enough or haven't been eating enough for a long time. Next one is sleep. So if they're having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, any of those,
Mhm.
that can be a good sign. I used to have this person that said that she thought it was normal to wake up 8 to 9 times a night, and that was just normal. But she had been doing one of those 90-day challenges at a gym or something, and I had asked her what her previous macros were before she came to me, and she was eating like 1,400 calories or something. And
And then went and did the challenge.
no, that's what the
Oh,
challenge gave
that
her.
was a challenge. Okay, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And then when we started feeding her closer to her maintenance calories, she just slept through the night. She's like, "Oh my gosh, this is the best thing that's ever happened."
that's got to be so life
Like,
changing.
yeah. So if they're
That's
not sleeping, you can ask a couple further questions.
yeah, yeah.
The other thing is, sometimes you don't ask this a lot from your athletes, but the ones that you have closer relationships with, that maybe you're trying to figure out kind of what the obstacle is in their training. You can ask them about their sex drive. So if their
Yeah.
sex drive is like non-existent, that's also a big indicator that they're not eating enough. And
Okay.
it's a pretty good indicator of regular hormones. And to go along with that, for females, if they're not having a normal menstrual cycle, that's also a really big indicator too. And that would be
Yeah.
like without the use of hormonal birth control or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And is
Yep.
that once you the menstrual cycle is
Mm-hmm.
that specifically once you get below a certain body fat percentage, or is that like you're legit like maybe you're like starving yourself for like 3 or 4 months or something like that, and then
Yeah, it can be both.
okay, so it can be like
Yeah.
if you like maybe you're not below a certain body fat percentage, but you've been like under eating for a couple months, you could potentially lose your period.
Yep. So either one can happen. So some athletes are very lean and they lose their cycle because they don't have the body fat to support it. But
Mhm.
there are many females, including myself at the beginning, where I was not under my normal body fat percentage by any means. I was probably over, and I
Yeah.
was not having regular cycles. And it was because I had been in a deficit for almost 12 months. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just under eating for so long.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to like get out of that deficit and start to return to normal?
Yeah. So when I first started with WAG, I was in a deficit, even though I was only 125 pounds at the time. So that was always a little bit um, confusing to me as I look back to it.
Yeah.
And then even in that deficit, I eventually like gained back to about like 134, which is probably slightly under what my normal body weight is, just as where I sit normally.
Mhm.
Um, and then I was still in a deficit, but a lesser deficit for the following year.
Okay.
So that puts me at about like 18 months in
Wow.
a deficit.
Yeah.
But I had a major shoulder injury. So I had a major shoulder injury about 6 months after I moved to Atlanta.
Hmm.
And that took me out of CrossFit for about 4 months. And
Okay.
in that time, I didn't actually adjust my food. So I was probably closer to my maintenance at that point.
Okay.
When I wasn't doing as intensive training.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's actually when I got my period back.
Okay.
So when I had taken training down, when I had kept my food the same, and when I was going through rehab for that. But the interesting thing was I did end up, I did gain weight when I was rehabbing my shoulder. I was probably like 143. So within the next like 6 months, I had probably gained 8-ish pounds.
Okay.
But that was like a combination of my stress levels were through the roof because I was working these crazy hours. I
Right.
wasn't sleeping. I
Right.
was super sad about my shoulder, all those kind of things. And I had been in a deficit for a year plus. So my body was so not used to eating its normal amount of calories.
Right. Right.
But it did normalize.
Yeah.
So towards the end of my rehab, my activity was about the same, everything was about the same, and then everything kind of flattened out there.
Leveled out again.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So like when you get an athlete who's under eating, like uh do you work them in slowly to the calories, or like
Yep.
what's your game plan with the athletes?
Yep. So first thing is I get a baseline with where they're at, and then I kind of get an idea of how much they're training. So typical performance athletes that I work with are training 5 days a week for 2 to 3 hour sessions. Sometimes they're doubles, but I just look at a cumulative time, so I don't really care if they're double or single. I just look at total time.
Okay. Yep.
Yep. So I take into account, and then I look at what they do for a job. So I think that's something that kind of gets overlooked. A
Yeah.
lot of your calories and like daily expenditure is actually not in the gym, even for top athletes.
Right.
So if someone's like, yo, I coach all day and then I train like this and all this kind of things, I'm like, okay, like, that's going to be a lot different than someone that works a 9 to 5 at
Yeah.
their desk.
Right. Right.
So accounting for that.
I think
And
that's
then
sorry.
go
I
ahead.
think that's one big thing that people have forgotten about or lost
Yeah.
an understanding of is like how much walking you do in a day and how much that
Oh,
actually
yeah.
affects like your caloric intake and like your
Totally.
energy expenditure. Like I
Yeah.
know I started walking 4 miles a day this year, and it has been like I have to eat basically an extra 400 calories a day now
Yeah.
because if I want to stay
Walking is so awesome. When I coach general pop people and they're looking to lose weight, my big thing that I go to is adding a step goal.
yeah
And I put that step goal around 10,000 steps.
yeah
And
yeah
it's impressive how much activity that is.
yeah for
And
sure.
I would much rather add some light activity to their day than cut their calories. So
Right.
yeah,
It's like you think about it, it's
it's pretty
like
crazy.
it's like walking up to the convenience store and back is like if you do
Oh
that,
yeah.
like that's a pretty significant amount of activity for somebody, and that's about relatively like that's about what 3-4 miles is walking.
Yeah, I remember when quarantine first started and we were in that lockdown where you could only go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Jess and I would go out before dinner every night, and we would walk for an hour and just see how many steps we could get in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we were just so bored, and we're just like, well, we can walk around the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it takes like an hour to get
For sure.
like 5,000 steps. So it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
10,000 is not a small feat.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a pretty good chunk of time. It's about like 2 hours of
Yeah,
movement in a day.
exactly. So if you're coaching on the floor 4 hours, like that's a lot
Yeah.
compared
Yeah.
to someone that's sitting.
Right.
So
Right.
taking into account like their job for sure.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is it takes like a month to really start to know somebody. So I
Hmm.
think another thing is people are so hooked on this like instant gratification, but for me to make a decision about your intake without understanding your body and how it fluctuates throughout a month or maybe even 6 weeks would just be an experiment on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like that's cool if you're like just wanting to have new numbers every week.
Yeah.
I'll trick you into thinking that I'm giving you new numbers,
Yeah.
but
You're
they're
giving,
pretty much the same.
you're
Yeah.
giving away your secrets now.
Yeah, but any big changes, or I even hesitate to say the word big because there's never really any big changes in nutrition, but any like change is going to be after we figure out your consistency and like what your consistency looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's obviously like baseline. Like you have to get the consistency in order to like
Yeah,
make.
nothing is going to work, period, unless you're consistent.
Right.
So
Right.
if you've got to show me consistency first before I'm like, oh, here's another 20 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also helps me really understand. So if I see pretty similar throughout the week, I can know if it's working or not because I go off what you're telling me. I see
Hmm.
what you're eating. It's fairly consistent. No one's perfect. We don't expect you to be perfect, but there's a big difference between 1,700 calories one day, 2,100 calories the next day, 1,400, that kind of thing. Like it's different if
Right.
it's within a couple hundred, but yeah, we
Yeah.
want to look for a pretty consistent thing for a while,
Yeah.
and then ease you up from there. So yeah, I never take people on big jumps. I
Hmm.
really try to slowly work them up to their maintenance calories, and then I try to let them sit at their maintenance calories. So I think that's another thing that's a kind of lost,
Yeah.
is either being in this like I need to lose weight or I need to gain weight, which
Yeah.
there's a point in place for both, but you should really try to sit at your maintenance calories for 6 months.
Before you start making any like drastic changes into anything.
Yeah, especially if you're new to tracking your macros or tracking your nutrition,
Yeah.
just understanding and gaining the knowledge of what it looks like in a day to eat your maintenance calories and what those foods are, how much of those foods, just on a consistent level for, I would say it takes most people around 6 months to kind of really ingrain that image and those habits into their mind.
Yeah. So you think it's more of like a learning thing, basically?
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that most people don't know what their maintenance calories are, what it's like to maintenance. They're
Hmm.
either trying to lose weight or they're saying, fuck it, I'll eat whatever I want because I just did this whole cycle of trying to lose weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say most people don't understand or have never been taught or shown or coached through eating at their maintenance. And so it's new for a lot of people.
Okay.
And it's a lot higher than most people think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so what do you do with the athlete who comes in is like, I have aesthetic goals and I have
Mm-hmm.
performance goals. I'm under eating right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to, I have these goals of qualifying for this
Mm-hmm.
competition. Like, where do you start with that individual?
My first question is usually a little bit of comic relief. I'm usually like, well, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
usually kind of like, look at me and they're like, well, neither is happening.
Yeah.
So neither is
So,
happening. I'm not looking better and I'm also not performing well. So, and I'm like, okay, so it's not working. Okay, cool. So are you willing to change? Because that's the other thing is I can't make you do anything. It has to be you.
right.
So
Right.
I always tell people like, I'm not going to sabotage you. Like I'm
Right.
monitoring you for a reason.
Right.
So I think a big thing, I think that leads us to like one of our big points is like fear.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of the time, the reason athletes aren't eating, as much as they could
Mm-hmm.
is because they're scared. So they're scared that it's going to cause them to gain weight and they won't look as fit or they won't perform as well. Or like maybe that will happen eventually, something like that. And that just is mostly connected to either past experiences they've had with their own weight or just diet culture in general of kind of ingraining that mindset of like, no, you have to be smaller, you have to be thinner, whatever.
Yeah. So like, is it more of like an education thing to get them past that, or like an experience thing? Like, how do you get like if somebody's
Yeah,
fearful, eating more calories, how do you get that buy-in for them?
totally. So I usually ask them if they've had an experience where they've been overweight in their life or
Okay.
maybe like struggled with body image or something like that. And I kind of ask them to reflect on that experience. So if they're like, oh, I've eaten more in the past and it definitely doesn't work for me. And I usually am like, okay, well, were you tracking your food during that time? And
Mm-hmm.
were you exercising at the same level and intensity?
Yeah.
And most times people are like, no, I wasn't tracking. I just finished XYZ diet, or I was taking a break from the gym, or something like that. So, right off the bat, you can kind of point out to them that, look, like you weren't tracking, so you didn't really know how much more you were eating.
Mm-hmm.
And you also weren't exercising the same. So, those two things right there are going to be way different this time around.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're almost like more explaining to them, how things are going to be different, and then getting them to kind of like take a look back and reflect on, what was going on in their life during that time that maybe they had gained weight or, had a
Yeah.
bad experience with things. And
Yeah,
then,
kind of pointing out the other things that kind of contribute to that is really helpful for most people.
yeah. Do you think that fear ever goes away in somebody?
I mean, for me, I still have that fear. Like I've been eating at my maintenance probably since June.
Okay.
And I have never eaten this much food in my entire life. And I eat more than most people, I think. So, or most people I hang out with at least. And so I definitely have this like fear of, you know, I struggle with body image too.
Yeah.
And there are days when I wake up and I'm like, oh, like I swear my pants are tighter. Like I swear like my jeans are fitting different or something. Or
Mhm.
but then I take my weight every day and I have a nice little trend line so I can see when it goes up and down and that kind of thing. And when I look over the course of, I guess it's been 6 months, that average is exactly the same.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
sure, there's months where maybe I'm like a pound higher or a pound lower, but over the course, it's not 10 pounds. It's not even 5 pounds.
Right.
So having that like to look back on is really helpful. Looking at pictures and noticing that I look even stronger or things like that are really helpful.
Mhm.
And those are the things that I like to implement with my clients as well to kind of give other measures of where they're at and where they've been.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds um like to create a lot of change inside of like kind of diet culture almost, it sounds like there needs to be a lot more reflection of like hard data almost.
Not even that. I feel like it would be really helpful for some of the bigger athletes in the sport or more of the influencers to like really be open and honest with like how much they eat. Because there's some that claim they eat 2000 calories and that's just not true.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
point blank, if it is, like I don't know how long that's been going on or what, but that just that kind of blows my mind that would be even a functional amount for someone that's training at a games level. So it would be really cool to start seeing. I think the guys are a little bit more open about it than the females are, but from both sides, honestly, just to kind of not even just to teach people, but just like be open and kind of get away from that stigma of like eating less is better.
Yeah. Do you think so? Like, so you think it kind of comes from like the top end of the, community or the sport, specifically in regards to CrossFit, I guess, because we're both involved in the CrossFit sphere.
Right.
So
Yeah, totally. We're a little pigeonholed a little bit.
Yeah. So
No,
you
I
think
don't necessarily think it comes from the top, but I think it would be comforting to kind of those middle tier athletes to try that out if they saw someone they look up to or
so
aspire to be like doing that.
you think it happens more in the middle tier than the upper tier? Do you think there's like individuals inside of the upper tier that are like, chronically under eating and still
I do. Yeah, I do. I mean, not everybody has a nutrition coach. So,
for sure.
and even people who do have nutrition coaches, a lot of them approach it differently. And there's not like saying there's one best way or one wrong way, but, I think that there are still some that maybe are hesitant to give their athlete enough food or, don't give them the opportunity to figure out what is enough or what isn't enough. But to be honest, there's not like a specific formula. You really have to take one person, try it out with them, see how they respond, and then keep evolving it with them, because numbers that have worked for them previously are not going to always work for them, and their training cycles are going to change, and different things in their lifestyle are going to change, and that just needs to be a constant conversation. So it's not just a 3-month coaching experience, it's like a relationship for their competitive career.
Right.
And you want to lock someone down that's like wants to get you where you want to go, not just wants to boost their own kind of clientele by showing like before afters. Like
right.
No, like if you need to get stronger and we need to get you up 10 pounds, like that's what's going to happen. It's not going to look super sexy, but like it's going to accomplish the goal. And then we're going to go through another phase where we put you at maintenance or we go back down or whatever you need for your performance for that moment.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like the other thing that, people don't understand is like a lot of strength is a neurological adaptation. So like if you put on some weight to get stronger, a lot of the time when you come back off, like when you go into a little bit of deficit and like lose some of that weight, like the neurological adaptations to lift those loads will still be somewhere in there, might not be like you might, your 80-90% might feel a little bit heavier, but like come game time when like a dump of epinephrine, like those max will still be there,
Yeah, and you have experience with those numbers, so it's not just a number out of the blue too.
Right.
But yeah, it's really hard to get those numbers up if you're not giving the body enough energy or more energy than it needs in some cases.
Yeah. I had something that I totally forgot what it was. I hate when that happens.
The worst.
Yeah.
I hate when I'm like talking on this like really important point and then I get distracted by this tangent that I also want to mention, and then I forget the really important point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, you're like brains.
Like no, I had this really like well written in my head last night when I was sleeping.
Yeah, right.
For trying to sleep. Yeah.
For trying to sleep. Whatever.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of piggybacking off of like the, it's a lifelong thing. It seems like that is kind of like I don't know if it's necessarily like an issue inside of like diet culture. I think people and this is, more along the lines of like, I think Gen Pop than anything else, but it seems like people are with it for, 3 months and then they're, out of there. And then like, you see like the fluctuations happen again, and then maybe they come back and then there's fluctuations again. Like, and,
totally.
I think a lot of that happens with our, instant gratification culture that we're in right now. But like, what are you doing to like help that individual understand that this is like, a lifelong thing? It's not just like, if you want to, stay, if you're happy with how, or you've met your goals, I should say, how do you get these individuals to start to buy into it's a lifelong process and not just like a 3 months on, 3 months off thing.
Yeah, so I mean, in our culture, like you said, it's like all about instant gratification. So we're trying to get to this end goal, and then we're like, cool, got there, peace out.
Yeah.
But it's really about the behaviors and the changes that you learn and make along the way that are the things that stick with you, and that's how that you keep it up. So a lot of times what I kind of tell people is like the whole goal of tracking macros is to get to the point where you don't have to track.
Yeah.
So that's maybe not the case for a performance athlete because it needs to be so dialed in and specific and we need to have data and whatever. But for a general population person, like I don't want you to be 70 and tracking your macros. Like, no, like then I've failed you if that's the case. Like I want you to weigh and measure your food so that you can start building this inventory in your brain to know what 6 ounces of protein looks like, to know what a serving of carbs looks like, to know what your vegetable amount needs to be. And then after building that, that's why I love to start people at maintenance, because then they know how much they actually need to eat in a day.
Yeah.
They have that inventory and that knowledge to refer back to.
Yeah.
And because they're eating maintenance, they're not having these crazy cravings or like just desires to go off the walls because their body is not starving. It's eating what it needs to. Like I have to force feed myself sometimes because it's like, no, I just don't want to eat this. And you know, the reason I do that is because I am training for performance and I need to be consistent across the board. But I think that's not having cravings is a big thing people have never experienced. And it was something I had never experienced either until I ate at my maintenance calories.
Yeah.
For an extended period of time, not just 3 months, because I still had cravings at 3 months. Like it's been like 7 months, and now I'm like slowly
starting to come
coming
back
off
down.
that.
Yeah, but you have to think
Totally.
of it too, like you had 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, of like kind of possibly under eating or
that
maybe
yo-yo
thing. And then all of a sudden you're like consistent with it for 7 months. Like you still have 4 years of your body to like catch back up to like that consistent eating before like those cravings and those patterns that it's learned have stopped. So
I just I say this a lot, not only in the gym but with nutrition too. Like the only shortcut is consistency. So like the only true shortcut is being consistent. So if you want to change something, you need to consistently implement the strategy that you're using. And you've got to be patient. Because there's going to be like times where you feel like it's not working, but you just have to trust that you're being guided by somebody who, has the best intentions and is trying to get you where you want to get.
For sure.
So just reminding yourself of why you're doing it and just keep staying the course, because it is so hard sometimes when you just feel like it's not working or you just feel like you've hit a plateau, but you just got to keep doing it.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but it seems to me like kind of like a year mark is like when habits start to like form. When I was starting to try and read a little bit more, like I've literally forced myself to read for, I think it was like 20 minutes a day. And then like slowly it kind of evolved into, 10 pages or 15 pages a day, slowly evolved. And now it's to the point where, it was probably about after a year where it was to the point where I could, take a day off, but know that the next day I was coming back and I was going to get back on track with like, I'm going to, read for whatever designated time I have for that day.
Right.
I think that's probably similar to like nutrition, is like, if you can just commit, for, it seems like a long time, but like, look at,
it's really the rest of your life, because at some level you need to be aware of your intake of food. And as soon as you become unaware or go back into that denial phase, like that's when, like, I don't even like to say bad, but that's when weight changes happen. That's when changes in performance happen. But if you can really take the time to learn how to eat quality food and how to eat it in the right quantities, like over time, you'll have those skills to change it with whatever's happening with you.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. You'll have developed the habits to create like a lifelong
Yeah, and the confidence that you can do it, because it can get
Yeah,
overwhelming,
for
especially
sure.
at first when you're like, there's no way I can eat this much protein. I'm sorry, I just cannot.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, like we just got to work you up there, and we'll outline it, and we'll show you what it looks like in a day, and then you just straight up have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like just one bite at a time. Is that a good instead of one
One,
foot?
one gram of protein at a time.
You'd probably be eating for a long time if you ate 1
It'd be
gram
yeah, that'd be
at a
a
time.
while.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I think that's a good outlook is kind of like that lifelong habit or lifelong lifestyle, I should say, is a good way to
Yeah.
look at it.
Yeah, that, and just like not being so focused on the number on the scale, I think is really big too.
Are there
Yeah,
like
it's not.
different
Go ahead.
metrics that you like ask people to look for, like body fat percentage or like hormone
Um,
levels?
no, I'll have people take pictures each
Yeah.
week. It's a good way to kind of look at things over time, and also remind them that nothing crazy is happening. And then I ask about all their sleep and mood and hunger and
Okay.
stress and those kind of things
Yeah.
to kind
Yeah.
of see what's happening. Because sometimes when people have consistency in their food, all of a sudden they have consistency in all of those other things.
Mm-hmm.
So they're feeling a lot better just because they've found a nice routine, and routine is the best way to handle stress. So
For
kind of
sure.
adding that structure is really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. So you do more like pictures and then kind of like how you're feeling type thing?
Yeah. It depends on the athlete. I kind of ask them what they would like to measure, and kind of what I ask them to define success a lot. So I'll ask them
Yeah.
what success looks like to them. And
Yeah.
for some people, that is the number on the scale, and that's totally cool. We can go that route. I just want you to be aware of the other things that we can look at to make sure that you still know that you're progressing.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe last thing we can touch on here, and you kind of just touched on it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but like how do you set goals for nutrition? I know we kind of chatted a little bit about the
Mm-hmm.
athlete side of things, like is it aesthetics or is it performance? But like when
Mm-hmm.
GP or general population comes and tries to set up some nutrition goals, like a lot of times again topic
Mm-hmm.
of conversation is like the number on the scale. So like
Yep.
what are you kind of talking to them about for goals and setting up certain goals, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I don't do any of the goal setting. So
Okay.
I let them just be like, tell me, like, what do you want to do? Like, what's your goal?
Yeah.
And I also kind of let that organically evolve.
Okay.
So it usually starts with losing weight,
Mm-hmm.
and then it slowly becomes feeling good. And then generally it starts to be like, I just want to have the energy to do all the things I need to do in a day.
Yeah.
And once we kind of get to that point, once it kind of evolves to that point, that's when we also start to see the really positive physical changes, and different, sometimes the weight just kind of starts to come off at that point too as well.
Yeah. Right on. So it's more of like that you kind of just let their goals evolve over time type thing.
Yep. And for my athletes, it's usually a little bit less broad, so it's a little bit more specific. So it'll be, I have this competition here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to feel good. I want to feel ready. I want to,
Yeah.
do the best that I can. And so, that's a chunk of time that we're focused on that. And so we're developing profiles around that and making sure that we're doing everything we can to help them recover and have the energy to go into their sessions and really have that mental clarity to go into their workout.
Gotcha. So you're setting up kind of like specific time periods where like you're almost like trying to pick them for the competition as well.
Yep. And I would say for my athletes, the only goal that I do set for them is sometimes I have to force them into kind of chilling out. So just like me, and like very like, no, like I have this goal, I'm going to accomplish it, like if it's the last thing that I do.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not very sustainable. So you need to have periods of time where you're just like, okay, like I'm just gonna chill for a couple months and just make sure my body feels good. I'm still
Mhm.
gonna exercise. It's just not gonna be at the intensity. And that needs to happen with nutrition too. So a lot of times I'll give athletes a week where I'm just like, I don't want you to track your food.
Mhm.
I want you to eat, a high quality, but whatever feels good to you. And because we're not starving athletes, they generally don't go crazy or anything like that. In fact, most of the time they can't eat enough because they're tired or
Yeah.
whatever. It's really hard to eat enough food. I'm telling you,
It
it's really
is.
hard.
It
I
is.
think actually, what, I forgot to mention this, but Cara Saunders was like one of like the first people that I really felt was honest about how much food they ate. And it was
Yeah.
after she had a baby and she was like, just had finished the
One of
qualifiers for the games and stuff like that.
yeah. Yeah.
And she was like, I am just so happy to be deloading off of the amount of food that I need to consume for my training. Like, you don't
Yeah.
understand how hard it is to eat enough food. And I'm like, thank you. Like, it
Thank
really
you.
is a struggle to eat a lot of food. Like, it's really
Yeah.
hard. So sometimes for my athletes, I'll be like, okay, you don't have to force feed yourself. Like, just do what feels good. Like, sometimes I'll even deload them off their protein because they're just eating so much protein all the time and it can just get crazy and monotonous.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a nice refresher for them.
For
And they
sure.
usually come back like actually wanting the structure again
Yeah. Yeah.
and like kind of come back to that. So
For sure. For sure. Yeah. It's like it's tough for people to understand. Like eating is also kind of like a full-time job when you're an
oh
athlete.
yeah.
Not like
Yeah. There I have this other friend, his name's Will, and he says that a lot. He's always like, you don't understand like how much effort it is to eat as much food as I do. And I
yeah.
always every time I see his post on Instagram, I'm just like, oh, I totally understand. I get it.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
like something I never thought I would understand because I'm like, there's no amount of food that's hard to eat.
So until you're
But
like up
like,
to that like
yeah, until
6,000
you do it over and over and over and over, and you're like, oh, like that's so weird when you actually eat a lot all over time. Like
all the time. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't actually want it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Sweet. Well, yeah, thanks for I think we'll end it there.
Yeah, no problem.
Very cool Christmas tree in the background.
Oh,
So
thank you.
looks
I
like you
needed to
guys
charge my phone, so I had to move to a
yeah,
charging
yeah.
station.
Right on. Well, thanks for coming on, Hannah. How do people find you on Instagram if they have some nutrition questions?
Yeah, for sure. They can stalk your profile because I think sometimes you post about me. Just kidding. My Instagram handle is Hannah 2_MH. They can
Okay.
always feel free to just shoot me a DM if they have some questions.
Sweet. Right on. Do you have
Yeah.
an email that you want to share too, or
Yeah, Hannah at Venture CrossFit.
sweet?
Venture is VENTURE.
Sweet. Sweet. Well, thanks for listening, guys. If you guys are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or something else, make sure you head over to our YouTube channel. If you guys have just discovered us for the first time, if you guys could follow us on Instagram, that would be great. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, if you guys are watching on YouTube, you can also find us on Spotify or iTunes. I think we're on Stitcher now. And if you guys are just discovering us on YouTube, please head over to our Instagram and give us a follow. So thanks for listening, guys. Hannah, thank you again for coming on. And we
Yeah,
will,
thank you.
yeah, for sure. We'll catch you guys later.